Go ahead.
Well, I just want you to notice that for this special occasion, I changed the color of my hair. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for turning out. It was really touch and go as to whether I'd be here or not. There was a little matter of a fee, a lecture fee. And my agent first talked to Mr. Elias and asked for my usual $1,500, and then she came back to me and said, I think you better handle this one yourself. Explained a few things about the conversation. So I talked to Mr. Elias, and I thought, well, I'll take the wind out of his sails right off the bat, and I said, I really want to appear at UCLA and rap with everybody, and just forget that fee, and I'll do it for $750. So then we had, we negotiated, and we finally compromised, and I got nothing. I tell you, that man has fingers of steel when he's got a buck in there. Anyhow, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm glad to be doing it for nothing, which is not quite true, because he did buy me dinner just now, and I didn't eat much because I was afraid he'd stick me with a check. But actually, it was a very pleasant occasion, and thank you for the dinner. The main chorus was Snake. Well, anyhow, we got that settled. Now, I'll answer any questions or talk about anything you like. Later, I'd like to get away from just films and talk about things like sex and money and the problems that you might face when you're out of these cohabitational dorms. But I think in the meantime, if there's anything that you all would like to ask about, I first of all, let's say a calling card, I like to say about myself so that the elements can divide and attack, or however you like it, that in 1967 I did a motion picture called Beach Red, which was a strongly anti-war film. The Department of Defense refused to give me any cooperation with it. The Department of the Navy urged that nothing be done to help me on it whatsoever. The Marines felt that because the picture was very honest and the Marines were shown doing their job, that they would cooperate, but it was turned down, so that I got no help at all. And at that time, I did the film because I felt that it would have a commentary on the Vietnam War. In '67, that was not a very popular stand. When I went around publicizing the film, I was asked about that, and I felt then that we were in an immoral war, that we had no business being there. We were supporting a corrupt government. We were supporting a government that had nothing to do with the democratic principles this country is supposed to stand for, and that we should get out of there. I still feel that way. I am for women's lib up to a point. In fact, I've always been for women's lib. Actually, when I was in college, really, way back then, I constantly was trying to get girls to take off their bras. I mean, well, how? And I still feel that way. I'm glad to note that many of you gals are women's lib advocates. All right, now, let's open the session, and if anybody'd like to ask any question about the film or about anything else.
We have two mics on each side of the ballroom, so if you do have a question, could you bother to get up and go to one of those mics so everybody could hear you? I saw a few hands.
I didn't hear you.
Walk over to one of the mics.
Anybody going to a mic?
Go ahead, over there.
Yes, Mr. Wilde. How did that snail taste?
Where are you, miss?
Right there.
Right here.
Let's start. I also want you to note that I wore long hair before any of you.
How did the snail taste?
Beg pardon?
The snail, how did it taste?
Pretty disgusting.
Was that really the snail you ate?
Well, I tell you what happened with the snail. The snail I really didn't eat because I like snails, and this was such a cute little, pretty big job. that they got some pork sausage instead that looked exactly like the meat of the snail. And, I sliced the pork sausage, and when I was supposed to pick up the snail, I picked up pork sausage. It was a hell of a mistake, because the pork sausage had turned in the heat, and I should have eaten the snail. What did you have for dinner? Pardon.
Oh, no, nothing. Was that one of those cobras they had in that skull where you fell over by the vulture?
No, that was a mole snake. The very fast one, black and white, that ran up a tree stump and then stopped like that, was a bird snake, and they're very poisonous. And we scouted the area before I did that scene. I wanted to know what was there, and we had a snake expert up from one of the zoos, and he checked them out and told me about this one, and he said, however, the fangs are in the back, like in our coral snake, so that when the snake bites, it has to sort of chew up on you before the fangs can get into play. And therefore, you have about 8 seconds. So I figured if I don't get that snake off in 6 or 8 seconds, I don't belong in the movies. Anyhow, the funny thing is that snakes generally don't attack. I mean, if they have young around and you suddenly step into their area, yes. Or if you wake them and frighten them. But otherwise, if you sort of shuffle along and give them some warning, they're not anxious to hit a great big thing, they can't ingest a man. So that actually one of those mole snakes struck at me, which I didn't know until I finished the scene, and much later, a couple of months later, I saw the rushes. I was just drowsing along, barely able to stand, and playing the part with eyes half closed, and then when I had finished the scene, they told me that the one snake struck at me. It was very interesting to see it later in the projection room. And since then I worked with, long before that I worked with a python in a film called The Treasure of the Golden Condor, which has been on television quite a bit. And that was an 18-foot python, weighed about 85 pounds and was about that big around. I mean, really just a mass of muscle. And in the picture, he's supposed to drop on my shoulders and wind himself around me. There's a terrible struggle. And there was a terrible struggle after they dropped him on me. And the struggle was me trying to hold the snake on me. The snake didn't want any part of me. He just wanted to get. And then, we'd have no scene. And it was very hard to hold him. And in Beach Red, I don't know if some of you might have seen the film, there's a scene of the 2 young soldiers, the 2 young Marines going through the jungle, and there are 2 pythons on the path. Now, these 2 young actors had no experience with pythons. And I called them, they caught these 2 pythons and put them in a cage. And I had the snake handler bring them over, and I told him they'd been fed, to put them down there in the path, and I called the 2 actors over, and I said, well, now here's what happens, Patrick Wolf. I said, you're going along here, and you just walk and looking for the enemy, and you don't see them, and just stop for a moment at this branch, and then go on, and a bird of Benning, I said, you follow, you're stringing out the wire, and you see the snakes, and you recoil so hard that you fall back, and you're on your ass trying to get away from them. And I said, okay, let's go. And they just stared at me. They didn't believe you. They thought I was kidding. And they said, what do you mean? Would those snakes walk up to them? And I said, yeah, they're not going to bite you. And I knew that if I didn't do something, they'd never do the scene, because they were, fairly impressive snakes. So I just said, well, here, watch me, and then you'll know where to stop and so on. And I played the 2 of them, and I walked forward, and there were the 2 pythons. And as I approached, I was shuffling on the path. Obviously, they saw me. They don't want to get stepped on, and they don't want to get involved with anything that they can't eat, most for. And once they hook on, you see, the jaws open, and the snake really can't get off. Their teeth are recurved, and all they can do is wind around, crush, and ingest. And, of course, this was not very feasible. So I just walked forward and stopped. Now, I could see below me, and here are the 2 actors watching me, so I didn't want to scare them. And I stopped, and one snake went whoom, and stopped just like that, just short of my pants. And I didn't move, I didn't say anything, just looked around. The snake pulled his head away and went to the other snake, and then I moved forward slowly, and they got out of the way. And then, when I was about, they were a yard away, or I played Bertabenny's part and just fell down and say like this. Well, the snakes again, they didn't want to attack me because I wasn't attacking them. And the actors did it then. There was no problem. Snakes didn't bother them either. Cobras and rattlers, that's another thing. That cobra bit the unit manager on the second day of shooting. The way that was arranged, that snake could get out here and there among those rocks, and he constantly tried, poor thing. And I was beside the camera with a spear. Every time the snake came out toward the camera, I would lift him and throw him back into the circle with the shaft of the spear. And the unit manager was on the other side with a stick and some burlap bags. And at one point, the snake got out and really lit out very, very fast. And the unit manager grabbed him, and before he could, grab him close enough to the head, the snake bit him twice in the thumb. And we had a doctor with us, one doctor or another. We had a relay. We had 5 doctors in revolving shifts on the picture. They put a tourniquet on his arm and gave him an injection of antivenin, and he had a pretty bad 24 hours, and then he was okay. We had a lot of other things that were much worse, really. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you were filming the part where you're running from the guy with the spear, and he throws it at you right towards the beginning there, I heard that during the filming that he really got a little bit carried away with that.
That
he
he
tried
did.
to hit your head.
He got carried away, and I almost got carried away. That scene was set up so that there was to be a cut at that point, because we're running into very thick thorn bushes. So I told him, when we get down there and you'll be coming close to me, just raise your spear and don't throw it, just stop. And then I'll stop, and we'll put the camera pointing on you, and we'll show you throwing the spear, and then we'll show a shot of me with the spear going past me. And as we got down to that point, I just had a funny sensation, and I looked back, and I could see him, and he was actually throwing that spear, just went by my ear and lit in the ground. I just grabbed it, and I turned and we cut. Well, I mean, what the hell? It would have been a very short picture. That's not. And that happened in quite a few things. In the fight with that great big warrior with the spears, and then the pangas. Well, he completely forgot the routine. He was fine, and we worked on it, and he was very good. But when we came to a take, he became like a wild man, just swinging every which way. I never knew what was happening. And also, I was afraid of hurting him, because every time, I had to attack too, and there was an opening. So there were a lot of exciting things going on all the time. Anything from the other?
Could you tell me what was the significance of the movie?
Beg pardon?
Could you tell me the significance of the movie?
Well, the theme of the movie, I think, was expressed in the foreword. I didn't see the beginning of this run, and sometimes they cut these things out, but I hope it said that man must understand his fellow man, or all mankind will live like the animals in the jungle. And that's really what the picture meant underneath the action. If the man who, my partner in the safari, the man who owned the safari, if he had recognized that these people whose land this was had different customs, different ways than his, and that we were in their land, if their custom was that anybody going through their land has to pay for that passage, if he had understood that, there would have been no attack on the safari, no killings, and no picture. So it's that kind of thing. People have to realize more and more that people are different, and they have a right to be different, and they have a right to have a different philosophy, to look different, to speak differently, and the important thing is to understand them. I think the case of China being admitted finally into the United Nations is a very interesting case in point. Why now? Why not 20 years ago? Why not 10 years ago? it just doesn't make any sense. If things had been reversed and, let's say, England had not been admitted into the United States because there was enough of a bloc to vote against them, we would constantly have been fighting and battling how terrible and unfair and so on it is. That they were not admitted. I mean, the United Nations is supposed to be a league of all nations. Anyhow, that's what I meant to say.
Okay, were those real Africans?
Yes.
And if so, how come they were so fat?
They were so fat.
Yeah.
You don't mean the warriors who chased me?
Yeah, they were.
Because I wore them
too.
down. There was only one who was fat, Big John
But
Marcus.
The other one was fat too.
He was a good eater.
Damn, he sure was.
And actually, a lot of the villagers are pretty heavy. Now, these men were in very good condition. But a lot of people who appear fat are really not fat. They're merely blown up from lack of proper food, lack of protein particularly. And you'll see that in many areas where people are on the verge of starvation, who have constant hunger, and about a third of the world has constant hunger today. And you'll see children with these blown up bellies in many parts of South America and Africa and the Orient, even in parts of Europe. Anything else?
We have next question, please.
Yes, I was just curious how you approached these people. What was their reaction to your initial overture, and what were any problems, you've already described some, that you had in working with non-actors and trying to convey the ideas that you wanted to get across in the film to them?
We will now play the overture. Actually, it was an interesting experience. These people had never seen a movie camera. They had never seen a movie. They were the Provender tribe, and I picked the area because I didn't want natives who were urbanized, who had seen a lot of movies and would imitate what they had seen. And with these people, it was really wonderful to work. I did improvisations with the various applicants for the parts of the warriors, because the only one who was a professional was the leader, and he often also translated for me. He was a very, very fine actor and a very fine man. The improvisation I did was on basic things that I felt they would feel very clearly and strongly. Footprint in the dirt, and I would take one and then the other and say to one, "You are the best hunter in the tribe, and your father before you was the best hunter, and you each killed 10 lions, and you know that footprint meant, because it's indented this way, that the man jumped in that direction. And this other man, he's a fool, he drinks too much, and he's known as the drunkard of the village, and he's never killed a lion that anybody saw, but he says he did." And then I'd go to the other one and tell him similar things, but opposite, that this indentation meant that he jumped that way, and that this man is known to be a liar, and on and on. They called him Jackal behind his back and so on. And then get them going. Now, neither one knew what the other had been told. And they'd start the improvisation, one would say, "Abba, abba, abba, blah, blah," and the other one would say, "No, no, no," so A, B, C, D, F, G, that way. And they'd get into an argument. And it was interesting to watch. They quickly forgot about their stage fright, about any inhibitions, because I was watching and they were trying out for a role. And several pairs of them came to blows, because as the insults flew, one got an unexpected zinger, and boom, the other one topped him, and they were really in the scene. And one of them, Sandy Promo, the Zulu, who had sort of mustache and beard, and went home after a while. He got fed up with the hunt and didn't want any more of it and went home. And the leader spears him through the back. He was so frightened when I first interviewed him and did these improvisations with him that he literally could not speak. I mean, he just And that was the way it was. And the first time that he went through it, he barely spoke a few words with the other guy, and I told him that looked very interesting and so on, and let's do it again. Did it again, and he came to life more and more. And he became, in no time at all, one of the best in the cast. And each of these men, within a week, was a complete actor in all the connotations. I mean, they were prima donnas within a week, but they were also damn good actors. I mean, they felt free to do all kinds of things, and they were great. They had fights among themselves, and the caste system was a constant problem. The leader of the Warriors, because he was a professional actor, would not share a tent with the other 9 because they were not professional actors. So I had to get him a special small tent. And then he was lonely but content, I guess. And the others, including a young artist who painted the title cards, but never painted in oil before this picture because he couldn't afford it. And I brought him along, and he lived with the Warriors, so he was always there sketching and seeing what we were doing. They'd have bloody battles. They'd have too much beer at night after dinner, and the camp manager would wake me time and again at 2 or 3, 4 in the morning and tell me that there's another battle going on, and I had to come and stop it. And he wouldn't go in. And the first time I went with him, he handed me an axe handle, and he had one. And I said, "What's this for?" He said, "You'll get killed if you go in there without it." I said, "I'm not going to go in with an axe handle. We just want to stop a fight, not get into one." And he said, "I'm not going in." I said, "Well, don't go in." And I went in, and they were at it, and I tell you, there's blood all over the place, the cots upside down, and it was strictly because of tribal insults. There were 5 different tribes. And these ancient, dumb things persist. And one starts with too much beer, makes some crack, just like in the improvisations. And there they were. And I went into the tent, and I yelled, "Warriors, stop that now." They came to attention like little Boy Scouts. And they stood there, blood streaming down their noses, panting, sweaty. And I explained to them how important it was that they be friends, not enemies, that they were warriors as a group and blood brothers, and it showed in their acting if they were friends and warriors together rather than squabbling and fighting. That would have quite an impression. They would, well, for about 8-10 days, that would be fine, and then there'd be some new ruckus about something. Any other microphones? Yes, miss.
I was just wondering how valid your representation.
Miss, I'm sorry. You were just wondering what?
How valid your representation of the African tribal cultures was. I mean, what were you basing your information on? And is it justified?
Did you all hear the question? How valid the representation of the African culture was, right?
Right.
Well, the culture was valid because the culture was there. I didn't impose it on them. I went there because it was already there. The village was there. That village was the village of the chief of the Provendas. And we used the villages as they were, with the people going about their business, doing the things that they did, doing their dances, their songs. Leo Robbins had nothing to do with any of it. As far as what happened in the story, all that was researched. Those things happened in various places and various times in Africa, and things very much like it happened in other parts of the world. Human beings, when it comes to punishments and cruelties, are very much alike no matter where they are.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
I was curious about the shots at the beginning of the movie of the elephant hunt. Where did they get shots of elephant hunts like that, and were any elephants killed?
Those elephant shots were filmed in Mozambique, in southern Rhodesia, Bechuanaland, and in the northern Transvaal. And they were all hunts done by the forestry in those areas when elephants got out of the reserves. Matter of fact, I read the other day, they're having serious problems now in many parts of Africa because the elephant herds have had a sudden population explosion. They break out of the reserves, destroy farms. I mean, elephants eat an incredible amount. And they knock down trees, and a couple of elephants can destroy I mean, all the farming of a village of 500 people in a couple of hours. Just trample it. And also they attack and kill. So that every now and then when the elephants would break out, they'd have to shoot them. And we had contacted all these people, the forestry game people in the various preserves, to let us know when anything like that occurred. And we got most of those shots before the picture actually started. And one, I just had to stop everything and boom, go to Bechuanaland and get some of the others. Anybody at the microphone?
Yes, I wondered what year the film was made, how it was released, and how it was received by the public and by the critics.
The film was finished in 1965 and released in 1966. It got, well, I would say, marvelous reviews. It was on the 10 best lists around the world. Many, many countries. In Sweden, 2 or 3 years ago, it was on again a list of the 10 best of the last 5 years. It was not sold or publicized to my liking because Paramount at that time changed hands, ownership, and the picture was sort of forgotten and released in a great big hurry and caught them by surprise. And by the time they discovered that it was a real sleeper, it had played many, many places, and it was then playing in theaters for very little money, and a lot of people saw it for the low prices instead of the big ones.
Also, if I could ask, are you working on a film now?
Well, yes, I'm always working on preparing films. I have 3 things in preparation now, and I'm having discussions with financing sources, which is one of the big headaches of making films, always has been, but in a way is more so today. But then the possibilities are better today because there are more sources instead of just the majors. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Wilde, I'd like to know if the actors who played the warriors saw the completed film, and if they did, what was their reaction to it?
I wasn't there when they saw the completed film because I didn't see much of the film myself until I was back in London. There was no way to see rushes where we were working. We were 110 miles from the nearest town. And I saw the first 2 or 3 days rushes about 12 days after we shot them. And it took us all day to go to this broken down little town and a theater that hadn't been used for 3 years to see the rushes and get back to our camp the same day. But the warriors, the townspeople never saw the film because, where they lived, there was just nothing, just no way. The warriors saw the film in the cities, and of course they went over and over. I think they all went broke paying to get in and see themselves again and again. Yes, sir.
Is it true that you were blackballed by the American film industry for about 10 years because of your political views?
No.
It's funny because that's what I heard when the
at
film
least,
came
I
out.
wasn't aware of it.
Because between like...
I was on, in fact I still am on one of these glorious lists. The red something, I forget what it's called. And at one time when I was under contract with 20th Century Fox, I joined a lot of actors in taking out an ad that had to do with, basic rights, freedom of speech, and this is about the Joe McCarthy thing. And I was called in to see Spiro Skouras, who was the president then of 20th Century Fox, and I forget who else was there, and they asked me why I had joined this bunch of communists in such a thing, and I said, well, I don't know anything about their being communists, and I'm not a communist, but I certainly believe that everything that ad said is perfectly right. It's only what the Bill of Rights and the Constitution guarantees us. We should have the right to express our views, whatever they are. And even at that time, a communist could be on the ticket as a presidential candidate. So, I mean, if that's legal, why can't anybody say anything he likes? That's interesting. They always have in England. Hyde Park is full of people preaching communism or anything else they like. And I don't think that communism works. I think it's a fascinating concept. It has many things that are, let's say, in the basics idealistic, but it would require a utopian people for it to work, and there's no place where it has really worked in the way it's spelled out. I mean, you can't say that Russia under Stalin was the kind of people's democracy that it purports to bring about. Anyhow, I was on the Joe Pine show a few years ago, which was very, very interesting. And off the set, off the telly, he really was a very nice guy. I mean, we didn't agree on many, many things, but he was a good guy. And he'd been wounded, he lost a leg in the war, and, you know, he had his thing. And when he got cancer and went to the hospital, I was in the East somewhere. I just done a personal appearance, and I got a call from his producer. Could I come back, and would it be possible for my wife to run the show for 1 week? And Otto Preminger was going to do it for a week to help Joe out while you know, he was going through cobalt treatments and whatnot. So I flew back, and I hosted the show for a week. My wife appeared a couple of times on it. My wife is Jean Wallace. And of course, the whole show had changed. It was very funny because he always had his group there, you know, who were very, very right-wing. And they expected the show to go in that vein. They had certain cues when they applauded and cheered, and the poor people who were on the, well, not poor people, the victims, let's say, who were thrown into the arena to fight each other on the show, of course, also expected the man in that chair to take certain views. Well, I didn't do that at all, and it sort of threw them for a loop. And one of these guys who got thrown because he was constantly using abuse and, you know, hyperbolic invective. I sound like Agnew there, don't I? Instead of fair argument, and I lit into him a couple of times, and at the end of the show he came over to me. He said, you know, you're an all right guy. We don't agree, but you're an all right guy. And he said, you know this red list, you know you're on that, don't you? And I said, no, frankly, I don't read it. And he said, well, you are. And he said, I tell you what, you're a right guy. I'll get you off that list. How about that? I said, no, please don't. I'd like to be on it. I mean, some of the best people were on that list. One of the people I remember who was a signature to the ad was, I mean, the first ad I talked about was Joe McCarthy. I don't know if he's still on the list. But anyhow, I think if anybody wants to say anything, whatever it is, he has a right to say it.
Mr. Wilde?
Yeah.
How long did it take you to film it, and did you have any censorship problems?
Well, on the first question, it took exactly 40 days. That was our shooting schedule. And on the 41st day, the monsoons came, and the sky was black, and everything was mud, and there were tremendous holes in the paved roads as we left. I knew I had to finish on the 40th day. That's all there was to it. So we really worked hard, and I had little mutinies in the early part of the picture. The assistant director threatened to quit because he said, I don't want to die in Africa. And well, I didn't either, but I told him that was the way we were going to work, and that this was just a sample, and I told them that in London, that this was not going to be easy. And then the cameraman came to me and he said, my crew are rebelling. My crew just can't stand this. I looked behind him, and there the crew going. So it went on like that for the whole picture. And we had a lot of rough stuff, but it was very exciting. It was wonderful, really. Loved being there. Beautiful. I'd like to go back again. Any questions?
You forgot the censorship.
Beg pardon? Oh, I beg your sorry, about censorship.
Oh.
Well, you mean the fact that I wasn't wearing a bra?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we had there was no censorship during the shooting. But at that time, I had a hell of a time with the code here, because the idea of all those African women running around, you know, with little loincloths was something, you know, hadn't been done, and they were very upset. And with a little girl, I had very specific written instructions and letters spelling out that it had to be, she had to be pre-adolescent, that there could be no swelling of the breasts visible. That was a little girl, in case you didn't know. You know, all these things. Well, you know, I adhered to that. She was a marvelous little girl, very, very bright. She went to a Catholic mission school, and I would say she'd be an A student in any Beverly Hills school. I get little notes from her every now and then. And in Dallas, when the picture came here, I was in Houston where the picture was about to play, and I was advised that the picture had been banned in Dallas for nudity, because I was running around in the nude. And I got very angry and checked on it. They hadn't even seen the picture. They had only heard that I ran around in the nude. And they banned it. And then we got after them, and they saw the picture, and it did play in Dallas. I mean, I was very careful with those bushes. Yes, sir.
Mr. Wilde, I wanted to know, was this the first movie you directed, and is acting and directing, you know, did it impose any special problems?
Well, it wasn't the first one. This was, I think, the fifth one. I did 7 altogether. And the producing and directing and acting really didn't bother me. It was a very efficient operation, actually, because I always knew exactly what I wanted. I always did what the director wanted. And there were no arguments.
Yes, all I want to say is that as far as I can think back or remember, all I see of Africa is that people are portrayed as having loincloths and spears all the time, and that they're always killing each other and killing like the headhunters and stuff like that. And I don't think that these type of pictures should be shown as much as like they are now, because I can remember one incident when a little girl came up to me. She was Caucasian, and she asked me if I was African. And I said no. And she said, well, she didn't like Africans because they were savage animals. And ever since then, I've had this feeling that showing pictures like these is not at least beneficial or anything like that. Has to change anything that's...
You know, the same little girl, actually, this was Africa 100 years ago. This could have been many another country 100 years ago. This could have been Germany, not 100 years ago, or Russia or Poland when the armies went back and forth, when the Germans invaded Poland, when the Russians swept back into Poland. Men have done terrible things in all eras, not only in Africa, and not only Africans. You can point to any people in the world, and their people have done terrible things to each other and to other people. It's strictly a matter of history. And the little girl could say the same thing to somebody who was of German ancestry or Hungarian or French or whatever, or American. You know, the Hiroshima thing and the fire bombing of Hamburg and Dresden, you know, it's appalling what mankind does to mankind. And these things, in the 19th century, well, about the time of this picture, Chaka the Zulu was a tremendously powerful chief. I mean, he was a really great chief with tens of thousands, I guess hundreds of thousands of people under him, in many tribes. And he was quite ruthless. He was a great general, and he had conquered all these tribes, and these other tribes, or many of the other tribes, were in relative slavery to the Zulus. I mean, they could just go in and take, and those people would come to the Zulu villages and work or be used as women, as concubines or whatever. When Chaka's mother died, he had one person killed in every Zulu village so that his nation would mourn with him for the death of his mother. you know, ancient days, if you read Gustave Flaubert's Salammbô and the Visigoths besieged Carthage, I think it was the Visigoths or the Goths anyway. Their way of keeping prisoners was not to put them in prison or in a corral. They just broke their legs with heavy metal bars and dumped them into a pit. And that's how that was run. And some of the things that are being done in prisons today aren't any better. I mean, these are the things that we have to understand and that we must realize do happen and that we should really fight against. Because mankind has come a long way and should have come a long way in every way. Mankind has come a long way technologically and in creature comforts principally. But as far as the kind of humanity that, let's say, are in the preachings of Christ, most of the time that's forgotten when it isn't, let's say, the opportune way to go. People look out for themselves, me number one, and the hell with everybody else. I mean, the do unto others as you would have them do unto you is very seldom practiced. And you can see it on the road. Now then, one of the things I notice, and this includes the short hairs and the long hairs and the beards and the clean-shaven ones, why are people such pigs when they're driving a car? What the hell is the big hurry that somebody's trying to get into crowded traffic and is stuck there, nobody will slow down and let him in? Why? What for? I make a point of letting people in, and then somebody back of me is honking. Why? He might need a break too. It's one of the selfish, dumb little things that people do. You know, people zoom ahead of each other and endanger each other, and wherever they're going, with the most they're saving by endangering themselves or others and showing off what hot shots they are, zooming in and out. I mean, maybe they'll save 1 minute if you figure it out by mile. If you're going 5 miles and that little maneuver and a dozen like it, maybe save them 1 minute. That's about it. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to know how you felt when you saw that you could survive 100 people.
When I what? Pardon me. How I felt when what?
Yeah. How you felt when you saw that you could survive 100 people? Is it your intelligence or my question is double. How you felt when you saw that you could survive?
Oh, you mean in the picture?
Yes, in the movie. Because you were more than 100 people was following you to kill you, and you could survive them.
Well, you see, that's the story. If I had played a man who was not familiar with Africa, who was not, let's say, able to negotiate in that kind of terrain, who didn't know the animal life and how to find water and how to find food, the story would have been impossible. You couldn't have set a stranger down there, you know, who'd never been there and expect him to survive. I never would believe it. So it had to be obviously a man who was used to it. And he used every device and every ingenuity that he could think of, just as you would, just as I would, in order to survive.
Can I make a comparison? Can I compare your movie with those of Western, you see,
well,
the
you
movie
can,
with,
but I don't like
with
it.
the white people and the Indian people?
No. I mean, I don't think so, because in the first place, I think that the warriors and the villagers in this picture were shown very honestly, the villagers exactly as they are today, and the warriors very honestly as they were 100 years ago. The terrain and the animal life were there. I didn't do them in a zoo. And the story was a story that could have been shot really, honestly, only in Africa. It was not a superimposed Western. What was going on was very indigenous. It was the kind of thing that has happened in Africa, could happen in Africa, and was very logical for Africa. It also could have happened, the same story could have been done in the Old West with Indians. It could have been done in ancient days, I suppose, in many parts of what is now Europe. You know, it's a very basic story of survival, of pursuit and survival. It does indignity to neither side. Both sides are shown as honest human beings trying to do what in their civilization, in their eyes, in the light of circumstances, is the thing to do.
Yes, Mr. Wilde, correct me if I'm wrong, but...
All right, I'll correct you.
Yes. I think I recall an interview with you around the time the film was released, and you had hopes that this relatively low-budget production was going to really take Hollywood by storm, and that you were going to, at the time you had wanted to impress the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences and maybe even get into Oscar contention. Well, how do you feel? I realize that didn't take place, but how do you feel now, seeing the success of films like Easy Rider or other low budget?
Well, I was a little bit early. I think if the film came out today, it would be one of the big blockbuster pictures. Because the reviews and the public reaction everywhere the picture was shown were really very, very rewarding. But at that time, pictures, well, the major distributors tended to look on the picture as a piece of merchandise. They looked at the budget, and everything else was geared to that. It was low budget, the advertising was low, the release schedule was quick. And unfortunately, that was the way it went. Because of the reviews, I finally went to New York and had a big meeting with them with stacks of reviews, and some of the reviewers, eminent reviewers of the best newspapers, attacked the distributor for the way it was released. And I pointed that out to them, and they did try to change the release system. It's very, very difficult, but they did open in a smaller house, a fairly good house in New York on Broadway, and the picture ran 14 weeks. And its initial openings, they'd opened it in 27 theaters for 1 week and goodbye. So they've gotten over, you know, let's say the acuteness of the bitterness, but I also felt that it did me so much good career-wise that it was worth it.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, I'd just like to comment on the girl and the last girl and her statement concerning the movie, and also that I disagree with the statement that this is history, because there's so little information concerning the African peoples and their culture that I don't see how you can say it is history when there's so little evidence, you know, presented.
Well, you see, this doesn't go back 1,000 years. It's only 100 years ago. And 100 years ago, Africa already had been going through colonization by the English, the Dutch, the Germans, the French. A great many works were written about Africa at that period.
But not the black man's opinion on it. You know, the black man's, it was his world. I mean, we're taking the European's attitude.
An attitude in what? You see,
towards
the
the
village.
Black man.
Well,
The African.
darling girl, the village that I photographed and where we worked was the village of the chief of the Provender tribe, not 100 years ago, but today. And everything that we saw there, the way the huts were built and the way the people ate and the way they made their music is the way it is done today. And while we were working there, there were tribal wars going on and people being massacred and mutilated, one tribe by the other, for no reason whatever except that somebody got gassed on beer and remember that such and such tribe did something to them 30 years ago and wanted to get even. And it's no different than the gang wars in Chicago or Los Angeles or New York.
Okay, but I'd just like to say that I do agree with the girl. And what
I beg pardon?
I do agree with the girl in her statement that it was detrimental in some aspect. And I'm just, this is just one view towards the movie, and that's all I
Well, as I say, everybody is entitled to a point of view.
Thank you.
I can only tell you that every effort was made to make the picture honest, not to make it detrimental to anyone, and certainly the man I played did things that were very similar to what the black people did. I don't think there was very much difference in the actions of either. They were both trying to survive. Yes, sir? Yes or no answer? Oh, I'm... Yeah. The head of the safari, the owner of the safari, was the man who was put in with the cobra. And the one who was actually bitten, the unit manager you're speaking of that I told you... Oh, no. No.
Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all.